I call the member for Hasluck.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to acknowledge the previous speakers and certainly the member from Melbourne Ports for the comments that they have made in support of this motion. I rise to support the member for Solomon's motion, which calls for the 19th of February of each year to be gazetted as the Bombing of Darwin Day and be named a day of national significance by the Governor-General. I've often read with interest the history of Darwin, the war that occurred and the events that followed afterwards. But in particular, when you trawl through the National Archive documents, some of those documents reveal the essence of thinking, the relationships that prevailed after that event. But in particular, I read one that said this, and I read with interest this one. It was an Advisory War Council minute issued in Melbourne on the 20th of January 1942. It was titled Press Reports on the Bombing of Darwin. The instructions by the Chief Publicity Censor, the Department of Information, forbidding publication of sensational reports of enemy operations unless officially confirmed were noted. The addendum stated, at the meeting of the Advisory War Council on the 5th of January, Mr Hughes referred to reports of the bombing which had been recently published in the press and on press postern in Sydney and Brisbane. Unauthorised reports of this nature caused needless anxiety, especially to wives and families who had been evacuated from Darwin, and he asked that censorship authorities be requested to issue instructions that reports of this nature are not to be published by the press or referred to on press posters unless they are sanctioned with the responsibility of the authority of the Commonwealth Government. When my attention was directed to the dramatised enemy report in Sunday Telegraph, Sydney and the Truth Melbourne of the supposed bombing of Darwin, I immediately, on January the 5th, issued an interim instruction to press and broadcasting stations forbidding the publication of sensational reports from enemy sources unless officially confirmed. This has since been simplified in the current instruction rules. And that really resulted in the suppression of the information in respect to the bombing of Darwin. It is a unique aspect of our history whereby it is probably the first time not only on our soil, but military service men and women and civilians living within the township of Darwin were affected by a direct assault by an enemy on Australian soil. That the stories that are remembered and encapsulated reflect the fear, the unexpectedness and the brutality of war. And when I look at Tora Tora Tora, and I also, when I watched the film Australia, I got an inkling of the impact it must have had on that particular day, the human shock of a city that was peaceful being absolutely disrupted by a bombing process that had a number of bombs far greater than that of Pearl Harbor. The misery and the sense of pain that would have been felt would be significant. This year, or next year, marks the 70th anniversary of that bombing, and I hope that we do take this chapter out of our history and we commemorate it in a way that acknowledges our servicemen and women, but also the civilian population that were caught up in that conflict, and that the remembering and the commemoration of those events will acknowledge the important element of our history that is a fabric of the society in which we live. I support the member for Solomon's call for the 19th of February of each year to be gazetted as the Bombing of Darwin Day and to be named a day of national significance, because I think it gives recognition, it commemorates all of those who were affected. It certainly acknowledges there was a phase in our history that, whilst not palatable, was still nevertheless a very powerful intervention from an external force. And I'd hate to see us lose that aspect of our history and for future generations not to know the sequence of those events, the number of lives that were officially recorded as being lost and the damage that was incurred. The commemoration will hopefully encourage others to scour the National Archives to have a look at the stories that are both human interest stories plus the logistical, factual tale and story of what happened within Darwin so that it is shared for future generations, and those affected will always be remembered. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.